And thank you so much, everybody. Welcome, good evening, and thank you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to our Zoom event. It's our virtual event for Book to Action. My name is Patty. I'm accompanied by Armando. We have a special guest today. And Earth Day is just around the corner. It's coming up on April the 22nd. To many of us, Earth Day is every day, but Earth Day is just around the corner. So it's so appropriate that we have today a virtual discussion about climate change. And we're going to be discussing the Climate Action Plan in San Leandro. This event is very special. It's just one part of our Book to Action event series. Book to Action is a statewide initiative in California, and it is made possible by the California Center of the Book in Southern California. And its structure kind of elevates the classic model of the book club, and then it elevates it to a wider structure. We invite participants to get a book, and we distribute them. And in this case, this year, we have Drawdown. It is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And it's by environmentalist and thought leader Paul Hawken. It's our featured book. Everyone that is registered today and in participating with us and in the room with us, in the virtual room, gets a book. Okay, so don't forget, if you don't have it yet, you can come to our main library at 300 Estudio and pick up the book at our curbside, contactless curbside pickup. And that goes on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And so our featured book is Drawdown. And today we are inviting people to act. That's the main difference in how it's elevated from a book club. You come and do activities like community farming or attending things like Fix-It clinics, which we have coming up. But today you're here and we're going to have a really great discussion. I'm super honored to have our special guest today. It's Dr. Hoi-Fei Mok. They are our sustainability manager and our partner in this whole series of events. The manager of the Office of Sustainability, they collaborate with city departments like our library and manage sustainability and resiliency projects throughout the community and with the city. They you have been a guiding force in connecting us with so many resources, so many sustainability resources throughout this journey. And thank you so much. Everybody, please welcome Faye. Thank you, Faye.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for the introduction and glad to be here tonight. And yeah, I'll just get started. So just wanted to frame a little bit about why we're talking about climate. So, there's a lot of urgency in this moment with annual wildfires, with smoke, power outages, things that we didn't used to see, past 3-4 years ago, but now they're happening more and more, and they're really, really viscerally hurting folks, and we can see those kind of impacts. And we want to go bigger and think more beyond just kind of recycling, composting, the things that we used to kind of associate with sustainability. So with those kind of destabilization, we want to be taking action and trying to think about, how can we get at the root causes of climate change, and how can we really affect change that can really prepare people for things that we can't undo at the moment, and also kind of prevent change further down the line. So we also want to understand that climate change is a threat multiplier. A lot of the inequities that we see under racism and poverty is really going to be exacerbated by climate change. So we want to make sure that solutions to climate change are also solutions to racism and poverty. So meeting both of those needs and making sure that we're not just kind of taking quick fixes to climate change and not just understanding it as a technical issue, with greenhouse gases, but also, societal issue and economic issues, things that really tie together all of these kind of root causes. Case in point with COVID, a lot of the conditions that have allowed the pandemic to be as widespread as they are right now are actually the same conditions that allow the climate crisis to be, what it is. A lot of the mismanagement of resources and scaling up globally in a really interconnected world allows for global impacts. And again, when we think about who's impacted by that, it's always the frontline communities, people who are impacted first and worst into those types of crises are the same people who will be impacted in climate change, people of color, low-income folks, people with disabilities, other types of things that will basically destabilize you first. So, all of this gives more reason to be more resilient and adaptable to things that are coming up. So I first want to start off with what we already know about these impacts, and your experience is valid, and we want to hear that. So I invite you to type into the chat some of your experiences. We all had a real experience with the wildfire smoke last fall in August and September. There was a couple of days where everything looked like it was from Blade Runner. I think you probably remember that. You probably took photos of it, where the sky was just red and you couldn't really see outside. You couldn't breathe. What was your experience during that time? How did the smoke affect you and your family? What did it feel like? For me personally, it's been a couple of years since this has happened. And as somebody who bikes regularly as a commuter, it's actually impacted my health. And I found that in the early days, I could go outside, I could still bike, but I've gotten more and more sensitive to the wildfire smoke. I can't go outside without having the more high density P100 masks anymore. So it's really hit me personally in terms of the immediacy of these impacts. And others also say, it gives a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. It impacts their folks who have asthma, they can't go outside. We see that, folks with kids, they can't go outside. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that happen. Invite you to continue to type into the chat and kind of share with each other things that are happening. Just to give a little bit of background of how this come about. We know that California actually does have a natural wildfire landscape. It's part of the ecosystem, and the indigenous folks, they knew that. So they really cited a lot of their settlements outside of historical fire zones, and they did kind of control burns. They knew how to manage that landscape so that we don't have these really huge, intense fires that we see today. As we've gotten into modern kind of urban life, we've built cities into fire zones, and we keep building despite what we know about that ecology. So, for example, Bay Vista is one of those high fire zones here in San Leandro. And with climate change, we see that the combination of increased temperatures, droughts, that leads to worse and worse fires. So historically, it used to be just a 5-month period where we have fires across California. Now that's actually 7 months. It's expanded, and we're seeing not just more and more of them, but longer and longer fires. It takes longer to contain. They're more intense. We see this the smoke, and not only are we burning trees. Now that we're burning cities, you get cars, you get industrial materials, you get plastics. That increases the toxicities of the materials that we breathe in. Something called the PM 2.5, which talks about the particulate material and the size of it, and that can get into your bloodstream. It's that small. So anytime you have children, or even just folks who have developing lungs or lung issues, that will really aggravate those type of conditions and stay with you. So again, these have really long-term kind of health implications. So some of the questions we want to be thinking about with wildfire smoke is how does needing healthcare access for, these asthma attacks or any type of, mental health things like the see in the chat here, thinking about panic and so on. How would that impact your routine, your ability to take care of your family, your job, your school? How about people working outside all day? Agricultural workers, maintenance workers, construction workers, people who are unhoused. They don't necessarily have choices to be able to navigate and to be able to get access to food or to jobs while these things are happening. Particularly when we're thinking about food, these kind of like long-term or unexpected impacts that might come out from this is, if agricultural workers can't be outside during snow because of various safety concerns, this could actually impact our food supply. Food prices could go up. So there's a lot of kind of unintended consequences or unanticipated consequences because all these kind of things are interconnected. Going back to the first slide. One of those unanticipated consequences is the power shutoff. So it was revealed a couple years ago that PG&E and other utilities were found responsible for a number of the wildfires because of lack of maintenance around power lines, which led to triggers for the fires. And because it's very expensive for them to continue to do maintenance, they've chosen instead in kind of the short term to shut off power during wildfire conditions as a way to kind of prevent fires from happening. And so obviously there's a whole suite of other consequences that happen when you turn off power. You get shut down of businesses, of schools, of facilities. There's a lot of uncertainty as to when and how this happens, especially those first 2 years. Again, changes to routine if you're managing children or elders. Some folks, in areas where they're really living in a fire zone, they might get shut off for a whole week, right? And so if you're low income, you can't afford to lose groceries for a whole week. That is not something that is sustainable. And then obviously there's a lot of immediate risks for people who depend on electricity for medical and mobility devices and electricity. So again, there's a whole suite of these kind of unanticipated consequences that now we have to be thinking about as people who are dealing with climate change and programming that really bleed into emergency management as well as kind of the social aspects as well. So this type of like kind of deep dive into a particular issue and kind of its offshoots is something that we can think about for a lot of other hazards as well. So I'm just going to quickly kind of touch upon some of the other things that we will expect in San Leandro. So some of you may have seen this slide before. It's the number of projected extreme heat days in San Leandro. So there's 3 different graphs which represent 3 different climate modeling. The red line is kind of the most extreme, which averages out to about 40 extreme heat days above 9 degrees by the end of the century. The yellow line represents the most mild model, which is less than five days on average by the end of the century. And unfortunately, we are trending more towards the most aggravated model. Even in my lifetime, a little bit over 30 years living here in San Leandro, I've seen personally the number of heat waves and the need for air conditioning really increase in San Leandro. And that didn't used to be the case when I was growing up. So it is something that is within our lifetimes, again, that we're seeing. Again, you might have seen this map before if you've been to some of the events. This is from the vulnerability assessment done by PlaceWorks, which looks at sea level rise as well as the fire risk. So if you see the blue and the pink represents both groundwater flooding as well as sea level rise. Again, it's different types of modeling that represent what we might expect for a particular level of risk. So it goes all the way up to 62 inches above sea level. And there's a number of different important landmarks and restaurants and businesses, and also our wastewater treatment plant, which is going to potentially be underwater. And obviously, if our wastewater treatment plant was underwater, you might get sewage coming out of your toilets, which would be not ideal for anybody. So that is one of the projects that the city is thinking about, and we're going to be, doing a wetlands project there to try and mitigate some of that anticipated flooding. So while we have the flooding on the western side of our city, the eastern side is potentially in the fire zone with around the Lake Chabot area. So again, there's a number of different things that we need to be thinking about with the climate change. And I just wanted to show some photos of things that are happening kind of in recent years. So these are some photos of extreme rain and storms that have happened in the last couple of years that have led to a lot of flooding of streets in Sonoma County, San Francisco, Marin County, and kind of similar areas. And our roads, they're not designed to be underwater. They're not designed to be flooded. So the more that we see these things happening, even disregarding kind of the immediate impact of having blocked roads, the long-term maintenance of these roads is going to be impacted. You're going to have more and more degradation of them and more potholes. So that in itself is also a problem. If you have residential homes that get flooded, or any kind of building, if you don't see immediate damage to the home, you might have long-term kind of mold issues, which again raises the health issue as well. So again, there's a whole suite of kind of associated impacts that we need to be thinking about. So this looks at some of the associated health impacts I just mentioned before. So we talked a little about the air pollution with wildfire smoke and some of the extreme heat and so on. I wanted to highlight the vector ecology. So we all know that with the pandemic, that is something that we're now more aware about. With climate change, things like mosquitoes are going to be more frequent because those temperatures and conditions are much more favorable to their breeding. So we do actually see an increase of things like Lyme disease and West Nile virus because mosquitoes are going to be more frequent. So that is, again, something that we need to be kind of thinking about and preparing for. So with all of that, those are the hazards that we want to be thinking about, but where do we want to go, and how do we prepare for and like think about the vision for the world that we do want to live in? So the framework that I always go back to is the framework of the just transition, which comes out of environmental justice and labor movements, which really just describes the transition away from reliance on fossil fuels, highways and incinerators and so on, to a world that is ecologically sustainable and equitable and just for all members. So really looking at renewable energy, public transit, local sustainable food, homes for all, and so on. So if you want to look more into just transition, Movement Generation has a really great zine that dives in deep into this material. This is just kind of the overview of it, basically just moving away from extractive economy to a renewable regenerative economy, and some of the pillars and reasons why some of these economies don't work for us, and what does a regenerative economy look like. So I definitely recommend Movement Generation's zine. It is available in English and Spanish online. One of the things that the Just Transition really centers is a really people-centered approach that prioritizes frontline communities that, again, were going to be impacted first and worst. So I think a lot about my family. This is a bit of my family because they all live here in San Leandro. We all grew up here, and really are going to be the people who are going to be impacted: people of color, immigrants, low-income folks, in-house. So when I'm doing this work, I'm thinking about folks like my grandparents and my chosen family, and how can I be best serving them. So some of the things that we want to be moving towards include walkable, bikeable neighborhoods. I think all of us, as much as the pandemic has been terrible, it's also been, I think, nice in seeing that people are getting to know their neighbors more and being able just to walk in and get to know the neighborhood. Hopefully, we can move towards a city where everything is walkable and that all of our assets are going to be, within 1 to 2 miles that we can get to. This includes, living in healthy homes and families and making sure that the materials that we're building our homes with is, all sustainable and healthy, and that our families and folks living in them are also going to be healthy as well. That, of course, includes making sure that we have clean energy and water and food, and all the resources that we're using are sustainable. Green jobs is obviously a big component of this. There's a huge kind of opportunity within the job market right now to move towards renewable energy and a lot of different technologies as well to make sure that, our world is going to be as sustainable as it can be. So there's a lot of innovation there. People don't always associate cost savings with climate change, but I think that in anticipation of the potential emergencies that we will have, to do the changes that we need right now upfront will save us money in the long run. And even if you're just thinking really basically about energy efficiency, there's a lot of savings there that we can take advantage of right now. That leads into thinking just really basically about resilience in future climate disasters. There's a certain amount of climate change that's already built in, that, if we stop using fossil fuels tomorrow, you still will see a delayed effect, and we still have those climate disasters built in. So we want to make sure that we are going to be prepared and resilient in the face of those kind of events. And then lastly, just thinking about conservation of natural spaces and green spaces, and not just humans, but also wildlife and plant life. And that also depend on us to be sure that they're not going to go extinct as well. So I noticed there's a question here about coal cement, and I'll answer that in a little bit. But just wanted to wrap up with, what can you do about all of this, and what kind of things is the city doing? So there are a couple of upcoming events that I want to highlight. This is obviously part of the Book to Action program. There is an event called the Virtual Fixa Clinic that's happening on the 17th, where you can learn to fix things and really cultivate that culture of repair and not have to go and buy new things over and over again. So really encourage you to sign up for that. The Resilience Hub program is something that the city is leading on. Leandro was the lead in a grant for a number of Bay Area cities to do this work. And basically the idea is that places like community centers, schools, co-housing communities, places of worship, they already have the type of relationships and the ability to kind of activate people during an emergency and also during recovery as well. And knowing that the city is not going to be able to reach everybody, it doesn't have the resources to, we want to be partnering with those type of community-based organizations so that we can really work at the nexus of community resilience, emergency management, climate mitigation, and also equity. So basically, there's a leadership training program for these type of organizations so that they can really be prepared to combat climate change and to work with the city in order to get the right kind of infrastructure for these for the work. So just to go into a little bit deeper into the how Resilience Hub might work is that for something like an emergency shelter, they're only really operating like at the point of disruption. So like an earthquake, you only go there right after the earthquake, but you're not going to go to an emergency shelter on a day-to-day basis. But for something like a school or place of worship, you're going there every day. Like there's certain services, there's certain things that they can do. So we want to make sure that these types of organizations and resilience programming is really integrated into the community on a day-to-day basis. So it's not something that you only have to think about during an emergency. If you're only thinking about an emergency, you're probably panicking. There's probably you're going to be confused. So you want to have organizations where you already know it's there. I go to there. I know the people. I know what kind of programming they have, so that they can really help you during the disruption and also during the recovery period. And then, just a suite of other kind of opportunities for resilience hubs, which includes a dual checkout, which we're trying to do at the library as well, the different renewable energy, youth engagement, green spaces, job creation, and so on. So there's a lot of, I think, possibility with these resilience hubs. Obviously, the Common Action Plan is a big component of that. So basically, that is a deep dive into understanding our vulnerability to the different hazards, which I talked about, and then also developing out a whole suite of strategies and programming that we might be thinking about. So that is on the timeline to get approved by council in June. So keep an eye out for that announcement. And then also once we move into implementation throughout the summer and the fall, this really will, include participation from all of us. So we'll keep sending out, opportunities for how to engage on all of that. Cool cement, going back to the question in the chat, is definitely something that we're thinking about as part of one of the strategies. There's no specific kind of project on that yet, but I am working with the staff to try and include that for the purchasing that they do. Some of the other things that we did over the course of the last year, we had a virtual community garden design workshop, which I think some of you attended back in November. And this was something that we did in partnership with a number of really great organizations, which included Suguarte Land Trust, which is an Indigenous Ohlone group here in the Bay Area, and really thinking about how we can incorporate Indigenous history as well as watershed ecology and gardening into school curriculum and open it up as a space for the public to engage with as well. So we identified a couple of different design elements, and we're still working with the school district and Stopways to integrate that in and to actually make it into fruition. So that is still on docket. And then you might have also heard about the Street Tree program, which we're doing in partnership through San Leandro 2050. So they've gotten a small grant from the Air Resources Board and can offer free street trees to residents across the city. So if you email trees@sanleandro2050.org, you'll be able to access the eligibility kind of details around that. And I think that's it. So I'm going to go back to Patty for questions.
Thank you, Faye. That was really wonderful. The overview was the way that you presented it, how it hits close, and how you involved everybody, and how it impacted us. Sometimes these natural disasters happen, but once they start happening over and over and over again, and the anxiety of it, it's like, it'll pass, we'll survive, but the work that you do in promoting sustainability and resiliency, super important. So thank you for your work on that. I guess, did you get all the questions answered? There was one question, I think, about heat islands, and that was brought up.
Yeah. So maybe we'll answer that first. So the question is, are trees being placed strategically to mitigate heat islands or on request from residents? So it's a little bit of combination. So the Air Resources Grant does specify certain neighborhoods, and these are specific neighborhoods based on air pollution, which is very much related to heat islands. So the nature of the grant prioritizes the funding for these type of neighborhoods, but you still have to have the permission from the resident to do it. So we as a city at the moment can't just go in and plant a tree. So we're working on trying to step up our outreach now that things are opening up a little bit more. So hopefully you'll see a little bit more kind of promotion of that program. And then just seeing the question, any discussion at City Hall on adopting the tree ordinance, protecting healthy trees next to streets in front of homes from being cut down. So I haven't heard anything about a new tree ordinance. There is an existing kind of tree program, or kind of the understanding of the implementation of the tree program, where um, only trees where they're in danger of leaning over or falling down are going to be cut down, or if they're diseased. So healthy trees don't get cut down um, unless they're like kind of blocking sewage or something like that. So that isn't something that the city does.
Great. I think that was most of the questions. Everyone feel free to add any more questions as we keep talking. But I have a few questions that I have for you, Faye. And it relates kind of, you kind of touched up on it. And you involved the team. And I actually attended this because I was getting my feet wet in sustainability. And it was a real honor to hear everybody's take on this. But the community gardening project that you were heading up with Sugorote at Bancroft Middle School. Like you kind of touched on it. We all know about, many of us know about doing things individually on the individual level, recycling, not using plastic, using your water bottle, trying to carpool and such, and compost. So we know a lot of those tips in unison can help the environment. But there is a push and kind of an emphasis on community driven decisions. And I loved hearing what the Friends of the San Leandro Creek, and especially the middle schoolers, all of their ideas. I really wanted to touch up on that because that's one of your kind of things that you want to emphasize. Why is it so important to involve the community and give them that sense of agency and let them know, because sometimes I am doing these things that we know are green, but there's something about drawing the community in and catalyzing so that we can make a movement together. And that's kind of like what
Yeah.
action is. Can you
Yeah.
touch
Yeah.
upon
Yeah, so it is definitely like a best practice within climate, the climate field. We call it the community-driven planning approach. And it really, at the core of it, is about equity and relationship building. And the short of it is that, with the implementation of government policies, there's a real long history of government, both intentionally and unconsciously, um, causing harm to residents because of these type of policies, particularly racial discrimination in kind of disability access and so on. So that has led to both the institutional racism that we see today and also kind of distrust in government. So even though we come into this work with the best of intentions to fight climate change and trying to protect people and so on, there's a lot of people out there who don't trust what we're doing because there is this long history of coming in and taking and without really asking, really. So part of it really is like repairing that trust with people and like trying to have them lead us in what they know best, because people's lives, they know best what the nature of that work is, the nature of what's on the ground, and their day-to-day kind of life. So I think that lived experience really is valued when you stop and listen to really have them be at the decision making table. And as much as we say that, oh yeah, we're already providing public meetings and so on, like a lot of it is not, unless you intentionally make it accessible by either providing stipends or meeting people where they're at or providing transit to those meetings. You end up by default only getting people who have the time, who have the ability to get to those meetings. So you really have to be making that effort to reach people. So a lot of it is just doing that. And then the other part of it is um, climate change being as big of an issue as it is, there's no way that San Leandro's ever going to have enough staff people to be able to do this work. Like, you need like a group of like 10, 15, 20 people to like really do this well. And that's just not reasonable. It's not being expected. So really need to be doing this in partnership with people and like to really get everybody's buy-in in order to do this work. It really requires, unfortunately, it does require behavior change on everybody's part. So part of being part of the decision, you inherently get a certain amount of buy-in and saying, yes, I agree to, bike everywhere, or I agree to take public transit, or, whatever the policy is, because you've been part of those discussions. You now understand what it takes in order to have what we want, like the vision for the well-being and so on. So I think that, by involving people from the upfront, you're then able to have more partners when you actually do implementation, which is really where the difficult thing is, like trying to get that change happening. So it's both a strategy for having more equity and also for implementation as well. So I see that there's a couple of questions here, Sheila. I'll try and get to them. So one is if there's been any discussion of buying houses that are at risk of flooding, as have been seen elsewhere. There is no immediate discussion of that. The question about displacement or trying to get people to like force removal, or it's a very politically touchy subject, and it is very, it's just very difficult to get people on board with a lot of that. So far, I think starting with public education around like what is expected, what is the impact that's going to be happening in the areas that we're expecting flooding, is definitely a good start. So have people make up their own decisions, so that we don't have to go in there and force people to do anything is always best. So, but there are definitely other cities who are already talking about this type of removal and so on. So Santa Cruz is one of them. So we definitely are keeping an eye on how they progressed through these types of policy decisions, and then kind of seeing what the appetite is for these types of solutions as well. And then another question here, is there any discussion of creating micro power plants? Definitely meaningful when there is another power outage, and also helpful in particular community centers. So yes, we don't have power plants per se, but definitely microgrids. So microgrids are basically smaller areas where you can island and not depend on the entire PG&E or EVCE grid. You can rely on your own battery system, usually supplemented by solar or other kind of renewable energy and so on. So yes, this is something that all the cities are thinking about and working on. We are actually partnering, pending the council resolution, but there are discussions with EVCE to formalize the relationship and to have them develop out all of our solar and battery storage on city facilities. So if it goes through, which it hasn't gone yet, but hopefully next month, it will be Berkeley, San Leandro, and I think Dublin will be the first 3 cities in the East Bay to move forward with this. And so you'll see within the next year or two, the development of solar and battery storages on our critical kind of city buildings, and then supplemented with other types of solar as well as EV charging as well. So next question, when will we see the action plan draft? You'll see it's live next month, so there'll be 30 days or so before the Planning Commission. That's when the documents will go up, definitely before the council. So the Planning Commission documents, those are probably the best way to see that.
Is there any information on the website, say on the sustainability website? I can put the link on the chat.
On the information for the climate action?
On the climate action plan, yeah.
Yeah. So as soon as we are done finalizing the draft, I'll definitely upload it there as well. We're rushing the consultants to get it done as fast as they can. There's been some delay because of the pandemic, but we have gotten. Hopefully by Monday we'll have a draft that the staff and the team will be reviewing, and then depending on how much edits that we'll have, I'm anticipating kind of uploading everything by early May. So you'll see that both on our sustainability website as well as on the Planning Commission public documents there. Yeah. So supplemental question about proposing and building a wall in the bay. I haven't heard anything. Personally, I don't think it's a good idea, but that is one of the potential strategies that can be implemented. One of the key things that when we're thinking about sea level rise is that, obviously you can't just build a wall in front of San Leandro because it can go around. If you're not communicating with, Alameda, Oakland, or Hayward, it just doesn't make sense. And also, anytime that you do something on this side of the bay, you got to be thinking about what's going to happen on the side of San Mateo and the San Jose side as well. So this is definitely something that we're trying to coordinate regionally, and San Leandro is a part of networks such as the Bay Climate Adaptation Network, as well as USDN. So a lot of these kind of regional groups where we're discussing the sea level rise and kind of other climate hazards, and how can we respond regionally. In addition, the shoreline, there is intention to develop out a real specific shoreline master plan, which will go kind of more into project level depth about what to do specifically at that area. The level of strategies that are being developed for the Common Action Plan are kind of still somewhat high level, at least specific to sea level rise, just because of the breadth of topics that we need to cover for Common Action Plan. We're really specifically getting down to that level for sea level rise. So that is currently the next step that we're kind of thinking about for that area. However, we're definitely keeping in conversation with BCDC, which is the regional regulatory body that deals with sea level rise, for the marina development, as well as the East Bay parks and kind of the park area as well. So definitely in conversation with the folks who are going to be penalizing us if we don't do anything for that area.
There are two questions in the chat. One is there a discussion of getting city buildings retrofitted to electricity?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that means electrification. So that would be my dream, to get everybody in the city buildings retrofitted to electrification. There isn't a concrete plan yet that is going to be in play, I think. One of the major policy initiatives that we're considering for the city as a whole is going to be a REACH code, which basically is one of the ways that we can get people to electrification and away from natural gas. So obviously, if we're thinking about our residents and our businesses, we do also want to be thinking about our city buildings as well. So I think in that particular conversation, we'll touch upon that particular topic. And then the second question about the Biden rescue plan. Potentially there'll be some money. I haven't seen it yet. It does take a little while for it to trickle from the federal government down to the city level. And there are a lot of other projects that are going to be used from that kind of stimulus. We had a presentation from the city manager earlier this week, where kind of some of the stimulus dollars for kind COVID-related emergency. Among the 4 priority projects includes the Hesperian bike lanes. So that's kind of the one that's most climate relevant. So definitely there are infrastructure related things that we will see happening. But yeah, we'll kind of see as they go. Going back to the sea level rise question about the marina development, yes, that is the one that they are doing in conjunction and collaboration with BCDC, which again is the agency body that is responsible for sea level rise regulation in the Bay Area. So they're going to meet the regulatory definitions, I guess, as they are. So yes, I would say it is compatible to the regulatory extent. So I think those are all the immediate questions.
Yeah, those were all the so Patty, if you have any more.
I think I saw Virginia raise a hand. Virginia, if you want. I don't think you can talk on this format of Zoom, but Virginia, if you have a question, you can definitely type it in into the chat box for sure. But other than that, it sounds so exciting, everything that you have planned. Let's see, Virginia raised her hand, so I'm not sure if she can enter the question in, but oh, there it is, the Q&A. Oh wait, there's another one. So Virginia, we're gonna ask if you can enter whatever comments or questions you have into the Q&A at the bottom. But Mitch has actually brought up another question. Moving from natural gas to electrification would also help with earthquake safety. If people are able to remove gas lines from their houses, doing things to encourage house owners to do that would be good on both fronts.
Yes. I don't know what the question was in that, but yes, that is true.
I think what we're kind of getting at it. Thank you, Mitch. I think what we're getting at is there's so many various ways to achieve climate change. It is so varied, and the world of it, as mentioned here in Drawdown in the book, it's a huge book. There's about 100 or so different initiatives that you can take that are varied, going from energy use and even just the education of women and girls, things that Armando and I discussed that you didn't think about, like when you thought about climate change. We know about sea level rising and things like that, and climate, the heat of our planet, but even things such as getting women and young girls educated, that's so impactful. Or even just eating more vegetables. That's another thing, Michael Pollan, that was a topic. So yeah, I mean, I guess there are no other questions. I guess one that I had was, what is exciting to you? Because it's mentioned here in the book, a lot of the way that climate change news and updates are presented in the media is kind of negative, right? It's kind of like 98% of it, I think, was said in one of these articles, is kind of gloom inducing. But one way to excite the community is to kind of focus on what's positive and what we can do. What's exciting to you about the work that you do?
Yeah. Whenever I get, like doing this work, it can be really depressing, and like I often go back to the term climate apocalypse. It's my favorite term to talk about. But I think whenever I do get into one of those periods, like I go back to indigenous thinking, and part of environmental and climate justice is really centering indigenous wisdom and like thinking about how they were able to kind of steward the land and like do things like control burns and like really manage the ecosystem in a way that is both sustainable and also like beneficial for their kind of well-being as well. And so one of the things that they've talked about is like how we're kind of already living in the climate there isn't really any denial that the wildfires getting bigger, the smoke's getting bigger and so on. So if we're already living in that worst nightmare, then, you know, we can really recognize ourselves as having resilience. The resilience that we thought we needed, we already have because we're already living in right now. So that I always think is that kind of reframing and like kind of retelling of the story that we need, I think is really important. And like I think that's why again, like as an artist, I think a lot of this is really important to be able to tell the right story in order to bring people on board to move forward. So a lot of, I think a lot of what really is exciting is to think about, you know, what's the youth talking about? What are Indigenous folks talking about? Like, what are, you know, frontline communities talking about? So again, like kind of going back to the idea of recentering and kind of prioritizing those voices, like as we're moving forward. And one of the things I was really happy about when we're doing this particular programming was we kicked off with an event that centered Indigenous, you know, voices with the Cafe Aloni, and then also with the Enrique, who is our local book author, and so on. So I think that, you know, knowing that those sources of wisdom are here in the Bay Area and in San Leandro, really locally, is really exciting to me. And so, you know, just like going back to that, and then thinking about resilience and how we can kind of move in ways that can really be refreshing to the ways that we kind of think about this narrative. And like, you know, it's not just like, oh, the world is on fire and so on, but you know, it's really about us surviving and like building community with each other and taking care of each other and having that kind of solidarity with each other. That's really what is going to allow us to thrive during these times. And again, like as an organizer as well, like I see all of that happening here in the Bay Area, and particularly in the Bay Area, because like we have a really rich history of community organizing and kind of mutual aid and so on happening. So I think that it provides a lot of opportunity for us to continue building upon that as these things happen. And within government, I think it's really important to recognize those types of efforts and to be able to allow them to flourish and not to work in collaboration with them as well. So
awesome. I really appreciate that you mentioned that, because I love having the Cafe Oloni staff, the culinary chefs that were from there, and also Professor Enrique. And I like seeing their perspective, and I just like the juxtaposition. As you see in the book, we'll see all of these innovative ways that were like the solar paneling and all of that. But then juxtaposed next to that is all of these millennial old traditions that we're bringing back. We're kind of going back to the roots of how people have been always working with the land. So I just really appreciate that mix of what's innovative and not so innovative. I mean, it's innovative that we're going back to it, but it's been here for so many centuries.
Yeah.
And these civilizations have been doing that already. So I just love that.
Yeah.
If there are any other questions, I know climate change is hard to pack into just 1 hour, but we're definitely so thankful to have Faye and their ideas and their vision and share it with us with the climate action plan. In our chat box, Armando has offered a short survey for everyone here to give their feedback. Definitely give us your feedback about how this impacted you and what you learned. Hopefully you learned something a little more and helped you feel a little bit more empowered about climate change today. We have, as Faye has mentioned in their presentation, we actually have a few more events. This Saturday, we're going to have a very engaging virtual book talk. It's a book discussion. Kat and Mando will be there from 1 to 2 p.m. You can still definitely sign up for that. There's time. And on April 22nd, we're going to have a very special statewide event with the award-winning writer and director, Josh Tickle. He directed um, the the movie that's on Netflix right now. It's called Kiss the Ground, and it's the importance of creating sustainability with the soil that we grow our farmland in. Okay, so thank you so much. If there's any other questions or any other feedback, please take our survey once again. Thank you so much, Faye. Thank you everybody who has come and joined us today to have this very important discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad everybody was able to make it.
Thanks. Take care, everyone. Be safe out there.